I'm glad you could make it this morning. I know it's a bit cold and it's Saturday, and you've got a list of things to do today. But I do appreciate that that you come for this meeting that we set up really for you ladies. And then, like we started before, we want to focus on the women of the Bible, what we can learn from them, and how God can touch us and heal us and raise us to different levels through the stories of the women of the Bible, what we can learn from them. And today we've got a guest speaker. Sheila is our family's very dear friend, first of all, and she's also the wife of Pastor's mentor, previous mentor, I would say. But it's still, it's still the authority figure, definitely, and like father figure as well, I think. So Sheila was dear friend for a lot of years, to Pastor first, and then to me as well. So it's really an honor to have her here today. Before I ask her to share with us this morning, I would like to just do a little quick love offering for Sheila. If you don't mind, Sister Nicole, would you mind getting the thingy ready? Thank you. Sorry, it's yes, and after that we'll just ask Sheila to share with us, and after that we obviously, like always we do, we'll have time to just chillax and have some cup of tea and some nice treats there are for us set up. Before I remember just one more thing. Sister Yvette, our dear Sister Yvette, has her birthday on Thursday, so I think we'll start with singing happy birthday to her, if you don't mind. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Sister Yvette, happy birthday to you. May the Lord bless you, may the Lord bless you. May the dear Lord bless you. May the dear Lord bless you. Amen. Thank you, everyone. God bless you all. How old are you now? We hope you had a nice day. I did have a nice day. Thank you very much. 1 minute. Okay, Sister Sheila, do you need microphone, do you think, or...
Do you think I need a microphone?
No, you don't need
It's going to be
freeing on yourself.
I think the problem, I don't want to deafen you, so I think if you can't hear me, or I'm talking too quickly, put your hand up, and I'll know exactly what the problem is. Well, I'm glad it's this week and not last week that you invited me to come. Because last week I tried to fly like Superwoman, except that I landed on my chin. And so last week I couldn't speak, I was dripping blood everywhere, and I was rather sorry for myself. So I've still got the scar under my chin. And we had a birthday party on Wednesday for my husband. And my grandson said, "Grandma, you've got gravy all down your chin." I said, "It's not gravy." So if it looks as though I didn't wash this morning, that's the reason. Well, when Kasha asked me to come and speak, I knew exactly who I would speak on, because I have one of my favourite Bible characters is Esther. But it wasn't until this week that I really felt that God had given me the right words for today. And I've got 7 points. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be here for the next 7 hours. They're quite short points, but there were things that I felt God was saying to me about Esther. But before I read in Esther, I want to read you some verses in 1 Peter chapter 1, and verse 13. 1 Peter 1, verse 13, and it says, therefore, prepare your minds for action. Be self-controlled. Set your hope fully on the grace to be given you when Jesus Christ is revealed. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, be holy, for I am holy. And that's, I suppose you could say, the basis of what I want to speak to you about. Because I think Esther is a very good example to us as women of how we should behave. If I find the chapter, Esther will do well. And I'm really speaking from Esther chapter 2. Now you all know this story very well, I'm sure, because it's the sort of story that comes up, we tell it to the children. It's one we read because it's a love story in a sense. But a lot of people dismiss it because they say God isn't mentioned once in this book. But you know, I think God is mentioned all the way through because this is a story of a Jewish woman, and the Jews were God's chosen people, and how God used one woman to make a difference. Now, for many of us, we listen to stories of wonderful women who are great preachers, wonderful singers, politicians, and we think, oh, I could never be like that. I don't have that ability. But I want to stress to you today that God has got a job for each one of you. None of you can sit here and say, well, God can't use me, because he can. God has got a plan for your life. And so I just want to liken us a little bit to Esther. Now, her Jewish name was Hadassah, not Esther. And she was adopted by her uncle Mordecai.
Yeah.
And we're told in Esther chapter 2 and verse 7, Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father nor mother. So she started off, you could say, with a bit of a problem, a little bit of a difficulty because she was adopted. But I know from experience that when a child is adopted, they are loved, they are special, because our eldest daughter is adopted, and she's very, very precious to us, and we know that God chose her for us. And I believe that God had a plan for Esther's life when he gave her Mordecai as her uncle, because that was part of God's plan for the salvation of the Jewish people at that time. Now, not only was she adopted, she was also obedient. She did what her uncle asked. He'd taken his own daughter, and we're told she was lovely in form and feature. In other words, she was gorgeous. And so, because she was living in a foreign land, because she was in exile, she had to be very careful about the things she said and the things she did. So when the king decided to look for another queen, you all remember the story of Vashti. When the king sent for her, she said, I'm not coming. And you know, I've always had real sympathy for her. Because her husband was drunk, and he only wanted to show her off. And she'd had enough. And she said, I'm not coming. And so, I suppose the rebel in me probably would sympathise with Vashti that, well, why should I go? Get myself all dressed up just so that I can parade around for his friends.
Because there were consequences.
But because of she did her own thing, she was no longer queen. But we come back to the fact that God had a plan for his people. And so Vashti had to be removed to make way for a new queen. And so the king decided he was going to look for a new queen, and the way he did it was to have a countrywide Miss World contest, or a Miss Country contest. And anybody that was good looking was taken to the palace. They didn't have any choice in the matter. They had to go. And so we learned that Esther was very obedient. Now, she was also pleasant to people. She could have complained, I'm an orphan, I'm not in my own country, I don't want to spend the rest of my life in the king's harem. She didn't want, she may not have said, I really don't want to be parted from my uncle. But she didn't complain about it. She was pleasant. She was nice to people. And she didn't really have a choice anyway. She had to go into the palace to spend time because the king would want to size her up and decide whether he wanted to keep her or discard her. But she didn't make a fuss. She made friends easily. Because we're told in verse 8, Esther was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge over the harem. And the girl pleased him and won his favours. Now, it's quite possible that there were lots of, well, I'm sure there were many, many girls there, and Haggai had seen all of them. He'd heard their whining, he'd heard their moaning, he'd heard their demands, and yet he was taken with Esther. Now there was something special about her, and I believe it was because she was God's chosen person. And God has chosen each one of us. He wants us to be his princesses. He wants us to be his witnesses. He wants us to make friends with people. Not to be overpowering, not to be demanding, not to be complaining, not to be critical. He wants us to be nice to people so that we win their favours, that we win their friendship. Don't worry about the young man at the back. He's not distracting us, and it's not very comfortable for him to have to be in a group with a lot of ladies. So don't worry about him; he'll be fine. So you enjoy your crisps, all right? But we need to be pleasant, and we can only do that when we let the beauty of Jesus show out from us. There's a difference between the beauty that the world looks at, the glamour, and the beauty of someone that has had a relationship with the Lord Jesus. We can look at people and we think, oh, she's a bit ugly, or she looks funny. But when we get to know somebody, we can say, wow, they're special.
Yeah.
Now, if my stepmom was here, I'm going to bless her later on, you would look at her and your first reaction is, she hasn't got any hair. And that's because she's had cancer and she's had chemo and consequently she lost her hair.
Yeah.
But within a very short time, you would see the beauty of her character, because she just radiates the Lord Jesus. And so that's what Esther was doing. And I would say to you, ladies, radiate the beauty of Jesus so that people are attracted to you. And that way they'll listen to your message. Esther was also very wise. She knew when to keep her mouth shut. Because in verse 10 it says, Esther had not revealed her nationality because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. She had listened to his wise advice and she had followed it. And there are many times when it's wiser to keep our mouths shut than it is to speak. There's an awful temptation if somebody tells you a juicy bit of gossip to go and share it with somebody else. But if it's being given to you in confidence, keep it to yourself. And if it's malicious, keep it to yourself. And if it's not if you're not sure it's the truth, keep it to yourself. Because we need, as women of God, to be wise in the things we say. And we'll win people far more easily by having a gentle spirit and being careful what we say than if we preach at them, but then we're harsh. Or we say things that we really shouldn't. And the scripture says that we can ask God to help us to be wise. We can come to him and say, please give me the right words to say. And I can testify that when that happens, God does give us the right words. It's surprising when you're having a conversation with somebody that you've really been praying for, how God will direct the conversation. And if we're listening to his still voice, then he will drop things into our mind and we'll say things and afterwards we'll think, well, why did I say that? But it will open up the conversation so that we can share Jesus in ways that if we had been in control of the conversation, it wouldn't have gone that way. So don't be afraid to ask the Lord to guide you, to say the right things, or to keep quiet when the time is right. Now, something else about Esther was that she was very receptive. She was willing to accept instruction. Now, none of us like to be told what to do. But sometimes it helps if we've got someone who's older or someone who knows the situation, who says to us, I shouldn't do that, and don't do that. Now, we had a boy that we used to live with us. He came from Canada, and he came to do training. And when he came, he used to drive me to distraction because his table manners were absolutely appalling. And he would put the knife in the jam, and then he would put it in his mouth, and I'd say, Todd! And he'd say, sorry, I shouldn't do that. And Tony used to say, you know, you're ever so hard on him when it comes to his table manners. But I just felt that I needed to help him to understand the English way of eating, because the Canadians cut everything up and use a fork and scoop it in. And so I would check his table, correct his table manners. And most of the time it was a joke, but he learned. Now when he left the team eventually, and he went to university. And while he was at university, he befriended a young man. And he didn't know who that young man was because he's from Canada. And eventually that young man said, I'd like to take you home to meet my mum and dad. And so he went home, and he arranged to go with this young man home for the weekend. And he said, when he drove into the gates of this, what seemed to be a castle, the guard at the door saluted, and he thought, there's something strange here. And then when he got into the courtyard, someone came out and met them and saluted and took the bags. And Todd thought, where am I? And just before he was introduced to the parents, the boy realised he didn't know who he was going to see. And he said, oh, I better let you know my parents are the Duke and Duchess of Kent. And Todd took a big gulp. And he said afterwards, I was so thankful for all the time you had left me. Because he even went to Buckingham Palace. But it was part of his training. Now Esther had that kind of training to know how to behave in front of the king. And she had a year of training to do that. And I'm sure that she was very grateful. Now, she could have said, I know it all. I don't need to be taught how to behave in front of the king. But she didn't, because she was receptive to the training that he was giving. Now, we're told she had a year of beauty treatments. Oh, I fancied that. And for me, someone to rub me with oils and give me and tell me the best clothes to wear and things to do. But she accepted it all because she had the right attitude. And we need to have the right attitude, not only to hear what God is saying, but to listen to those that are wanting to help us. And sometimes the people that are wanting to help us are not the people we want to help us. Sometimes God uses people that we least expect to just come alongside us and say, I believe the Lord wants you to do this, or the Lord has given me a verse for you. We can't be choosy as to who God uses to speak to us. And Esther took in all the help that she could get because of the position that she was in. And we're told that when she went into the king, she listened to Hagar's advice as to what to wear and what to take with her. We're told that some of the